Good afternoon, and I'm very happy to be here. I want to thank Richard for inviting me to talk about an issue that is key to my heart. I just want you to know that Citizens Council for Health Freedom is a national organization sitting in the heart of liberal land, St. Paul, Minnesota, and we see how the federal government moves at the state level and how they impact what happens at the state level, and then we use that information as well to deal with policy on a national level. So I think that Chris did a very good job of showing us what I think is happening with medicine. So I like to say that the mission of medicine is being replaced by the business of healthcare. The mission of medicine is warm, the business of healthcare is cold and calculating. And that's what's happening in this country, and evidence-based medicine is one of its tools to head that direction. So never doubt the power of words. Evidence-based medicine has a nice sound until you delve into what it actually is. That's when you find out it has nothing to do with patient care and everything to do with seizing power over doctors and profiting at the expense of patients. As two PhDs, Steve Hickey and Hillary Roberts, wrote in their book, Tarnished Gold, the fundamental philosophy of EBM is central control. They say the term gives the impression of solid scientific evidence and discipline, but that evidence-based medicine is both irrational and unscientific. They call on doctors and patients to take back medicine from EBM statisticians and meta-analysts. Furthermore, they stress that EBM doesn't come from science. It originates from the legal system, and as such, it's a very useful tool for governments, health plans, and the medical establishment who use it as a legal framework to seize control of medicine despite having no license to practice and no professional obligation to patients. So this term, evidence-based medicine, reminds me of something Saul Alinsky said in Rules for Radicals. And I did find it interesting that Chris first mentioned Saul Alinsky, and I knew it was coming up in my speech. But Saul said, "It is a world not of angels, but of angles, where men speak of moral principles, but act on power principles." Evidence-based medicine sounds like it's chock full of moral principles, but its sole purpose is to seize power. It has nothing to do with providing good care to patients, and in fact, it prohibits good care to patients. The whole idea is to wrest the prescribing pen out of the doctor's hand and hand it over to technocrats who will tell the doctor what to prescribe, when, and for how long, and no more. Bluntly, Hickey and Roberts warn, evidence-based medicine increases uncertainty, confuses doctors, and ultimately kills patients. So in short, EBM is serious stuff. Dr. Jeffrey Singer, a general surgeon, wrote in Forbes magazine, "With the dawn of the 21st century, Medicare imposed protocols and regimentation on America's physicians through a centralized bureaucracy. Using so-called evidence-based medicine, these protocols are based on statistically generalized, rather than individualized, outcomes in large population groups." Hickey and Roberts agree, writing, "You cannot apply a probability you get from a population to a specific individual and expect it to be accurate or useful. EBM does not work for any particular patient." They add, "Each individual has enough unusual biochemical parameters to be considered a statistical outlier." End quote. In other words, patients have to be treated as the unique individuals they are. And patients are unique not only in their morals, in their cultural beliefs, in their religious beliefs, in their physiology, in their DNA, in their finances. They're just different in every way that you can think of. And as doctors, I know that you know this. Dr. Singer says it succinctly. "It is easy to standardize treatment protocols, but it is difficult to standardize patients. You're all doctors. I'm a nurse. We know this is true. There are no standardized patients, and there never will be. And as medicine reaches into the DNA, those differences are only going to expand. EBM is based on so-called best evidence, drawn from large, expensive, and slow statistical trials. For the majority of medicine, there are no clinical trials, but there is plenty of science that's taking place in your offices through observation and measurements of impact. In EBM, statistics are aggregated from large populations of unique individuals. But Hickey and Roberts note that there's no such thing as best evidence. There's only information. There's no such thing as best evidence. There's only information. Gary Belkin, who wrote an extensive paper called The Technocratic Wish, said, techniques that people see as objective proof when more carefully examined are easily seen to be the result of a multitude of subjective choices. He says measuring and paying for desirable outcomes seems straightforward, but the value-laden nature of what is desirable, the innumerable choices and disagreements as to outcome variables, interventions, and observed population definition make the measuring of outcomes anything but straightforward, end quote. In other words, EBM is not even science. But even if it were science, physicist Richard Feynman says, all scientific knowledge is uncertain. And Sir Karl Popper, a renowned philosopher, says, proofs do not occur in the empirical sciences if proof is considered an, quote, argument which establishes once and forever the truth of a theory. This reminds me of the debacle over hormone studies. You might recall this. In 2002, scientists were alarmed to learn that hormone replacement therapy using the drug Prempro had risk, including heart attacks. These new results, coming from a large federal randomized control study called the Women's Health Initiative, directly contradicted earlier and ongoing studies which showed reduced risk of heart attack. Isaac Schiff at Massachusetts General Hospital told the New York Times something very telling. He said, if there are such discrepancies, how many other medical facts do we believe based on one type of study or another type of study because we don't have the luxury of both? Indeed, you don't know what you don't know until you discover that you didn't know it. Yet, evidence-based medicine would take population-based studies and impose them on individuals as though they were apple pie and motherhood. True scientists know that these large-scale trials may provide knowledge, but there's nothing close to the whole truth and nothing but the truth in them. During a panel discussion our organization held on evidence-based medicine about 10 years ago, a cardiologist who called himself a clinical trialist of 41 years came from Henry Ford Health System in Detroit. He discussed what it was like to actually do clinical trials, and it was just very enlightening. He showed slides on how he might start with 36,000 potential patient subjects. And then for one reason or another, compliance issues, comorbidities, etc., the list was winnowed down to 16,000 patients or maybe even 6,000 patients. All 36,000 patients may have a heart attack, he said. But his clinical trial would not give him any idea how the treatment would impact the 20 or 30,000 people who were never picked for the trial. Other researchers, he said, might do a clinical trial using people from another part of the world with completely different value systems. How could the results from this trial be considered appropriate for the American population? Hickey and Roberts use a bit of humor to show why population-based statistics aren't good for the treatment of individual patients. They write, if we told you the height of each child in a class, you could calculate the average height for that class by dividing the sum of all the heights by the number of children. So if one girl is 4 foot 10 inches and her best friend is 5 foot 10 inches, you could calculate that their average height is 5 foot 4 inches. Clearly, clothes designed for their average height will not fit either of them. Calculating the average was easy. However, if we told you just the average value, it is not possible to work backwards to find the actual height of each girl. That information is lost. Thus, the application of population statistics to a particular patient's medical problem does not provide a good solution, even in principle, end quote. In short, the entire EBM enterprise is tomfoolery, a government-endorsed structure that risks patient lives and makes war on professional integrity and real science. Dr. David Eddy at Duke University says evidence-based medicine practice guidelines, now called protocols, attempt to make decisions for a collection of patients, and he warns, if an individual physician and a patient make a wrong decision, that patient will be harmed, but the damage will stop there. In contrast, practice policies are intended to influence thousands, even millions of decisions. If a policy is wrong, the harm can be huge, end quote. 10 years ago, when I did my paper on evidence-based medicine, I wanted to find out if researchers themselves had specific concerns. They did. Our report on the technocratic takeover has two lists. Well, the first includes problems with the evidence used to create protocols. The second includes problems with the content and use of these protocols. These are important lists because the concerns come from the research community. Some of the well-recognized problems with the evidence used to write protocols include researcher bias, differing views on what counts as best evidence, different hierarchies to classify the importance of evidence, conflicting evidence, flawed sources of data, insufficient reporting of negative results, flawed research, selection bias for the studies, possibilities of fraud. Now, mind you, these are all things that the researchers are concerned about. Meanwhile, the protocols and the use of protocols have problems including they are outdated before they're even published, there's a lack of rigor, they fail to document what values were used to make them, many protocols conflict with each other, they limit a new doctor's skills in clinical reasoning and decision-making. They are single disease focused when many patients have comorbidities. They are often influenced by special interest groups. Managers selectively interpret protocols. Protocols are based on values different than the patient's values. They reduce access to care through the elimination of practice variation, and they impede new medical technologies. The proponents of evidence-based medicine don't care about these lists. Evidence-based medicine is not focused on care, it's focused on control. And that control is focused on rationing care. Keith Syret at the University of Bristol in England, which is no stranger to rationing, says the technocratic approach of evidence-based medicine offers a means of scientifically depoliticizing the rationing debate. Sabine Kleinert, an executive editor at The Lancet in England, writes that evidence-based medicine has quickly advanced to evidence-based decision-making and evidence-based rationing, end quote. EBM protocols diffuse responsibility for rationing. They make it difficult to place blame. This is convenient for politicians and for those who want to control the practice of care. They can ration care without anybody to blame. Health plans and government can say doctors are always free to refuse the protocols, even though they know that doctors may suffer financially. Doctors could blame the government and health plans for forcing them to ration care. And both could blame the researchers. Never being forced to look the patient in the eye, government officials leave their cubicles without a care promptly at 4:30. And health plan executives go home with more cash in their pockets. Meanwhile, doctors may not sleep well, and patients may suffer and sometimes die. So recently, I was told a story by an older doctor about a younger doctor who came to this doctor, this older doctor, to say, this patient has this very alarming white count. What should I do? The older doctor said, admit him. The younger doctor said, doesn't fit the protocol. The older doctor said, admit him anyway. The younger doctor didn't. The patient died. And this is where I am concerned that our medical field here is going, that we have younger people who are only willing to follow the protocols. Well, this is managed care, and perhaps we should call it controlled care. Uwe Reinhardt, a quoted economist and professor at Princeton University, has said, EBM is the sine qua non of managed care, the whole foundation of it. For 40 years, America has been moving toward managed care, In 1972, President Nixon authorized $26 million for 110 HMO projects. In 1973, Ted Kennedy's HMO Act became law, forcing employers to offer the HMO and providing $375 million for the establishment of HMOs. In 1993, Hillary tried to impose a national managed care system, and after it failed, President Obama came along in 2010 and made it a reality. Traditional insurance is prohibited under Obamacare unless you are 29 and younger, and 98% of all new spending in Obamacare goes directly to managed care plans through the Obamacare exchanges. So let's not be deceived, and I don't think any of you are, but health plans are corporate socialized medicine. The patient who gets used to health freedom being curtailed by the health plan will not fight when all medical care is taken over by the government and run by the government-contracted health plans. EBM is healthcare rationing with a veneer of scientific validity. Politicians, government officials, and big health executives need to convince the public that medical decisions are being guided by science, even if it means their care is wrongly rationed away. So, I've just read Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals, and I found it a surprise. While I disagree with him on where he wants America to go and the type of revolution he wished for, his book includes tactics that doctors and patients could use in the battle over Obamacare, EBM, and who will control the practice of medicine. So here are a few ideas for action based off of his playbook. Alinsky says, tactics mean doing what you can with what you have. Well, as doctors, you have a mind, a practice, a roster of patients, advertising space, a circle of influence, clubs, groups, maybe a skill at writing or blogging or talking, and you have a lot of influence. Alinsky would say, figure out what you have and then use it. Doctors have a great deal of influence, so I suggest you use it to warn and engage your patients. They have no idea what's happening. They have no idea what's coming. Be transparent about protocols and checklists and penalties and electronic medical records and HIPAA. Tell them there's no privacy. There's no privacy in HIPAA. We actually have a rack card you can have in your offices that I brought some that some of you might like to take with and order later, and it says you don't have to sign the HIPAA form. Don't tell your patients that they must. Maybe tell them that they don't have to. Make this available, and they'll learn they don't have to sign it elsewhere. It will be an education for them. On the use of words, Saul Alinsky writes, we approach a critical point when our tongues trap our minds. He discusses how all acts and motives require a necessity for moral clothing. Likewise, EBM's title is The Moral Clothing of Rationing. Evidence-based medicine. A lot of the public are going to buy that. Underneath, there's not a shred of morality, just a calculated plan for putting outsiders in charge of medicine. Thus, never say the words evidence-based medicine. Counter them at every time that you have the opportunity. Say bureaucracy-based medicine, or bias-based medicine, or rationing-based medicine. So for instance, you could say, in response to when someone's talking about it, oh, you mean unscientific medicine, where the key elements of science, observation, measurement, and reasoning, are replaced by population statistics meaningless to the care of my individual patients. I don't practice that way. And when discussing the EBM takeover of medicine through protocols, use words that are simple, powerful, and straightforward, such as instead of practice guidelines or treatment protocols, call them corporate directives or government directives or rationing directives. Alinsky also writes, any attack of the status quo must use the strength of the enemy against itself. Congress, health plans, and federal officials, the purveyors of the takeover, are planning for you to keep the takeover secret. I suggest otherwise. So when you're told to limit care, violate privacy, impose electronic health records, boldly tell your patients about it. Then tell them, hopefully, you won't do it. Put a big sign on your door. There's a clinic in Minneapolis, or in St. Paul, that has a huge sign on their door as to why they don't have a certain insurance company. And the reason is because of the imposition of the protocols. And they make it clear right there, huge sign on the door. You might tell your patients, make available contact information for the members of Congress so they can talk to them easily. Here's another idea. Every time a patient comes in with a disease or condition that you must report to the government, give them a simple, easy-to-read form telling them Congress or their state legislature has required their private data to be shared for tracking, profiling, and research without their consent. This is all about engaging your patients in the battle. They have the most at stake. They have more at stake than you do. Or when you enter data into an electronic medical record at the hospital or clinic, warn your patient before you write anything that 2.2 million entities can get access under HIPAA and high-tech. This is a federal number from a federal rule. Tell them to ask you to omit any data they don't want into the system. This is engaging them. Tell them, as I said before, that HIPAA does not protect privacy. And if you have your own practice, don't share their data. You can have an electronic health record, don't let it get outside your office. And then boldly claim on a big sign outside your clinic that your clinic protects patient privacy. Make it your corner on the market. The sign can proclaim this selling feature of your clinic and educate patients at the same time. If you use paper records, I just came up with this idea this morning. If you use paper records and have to pay a fine, charge extra for your paper records and call it a privacy fee. Here's another idea. Create a form that you can hand to your patients that says the following. Your health plan, whose executives and staff are not here in this room with us today, has a standardized directive for your medical condition, which I, as a physician, do not believe is in your best interest. If I do not comply with the directive, I face possibility of reduced income and lower compliance score because they are tracking my treatment decisions on this computer. However, in good conscience and under my professional obligation to you, I will not prescribe anything less than what I believe is good care and the right treatment for you as an individual. Are you agreeable to me providing you with personalized care that is outside of the government's or your health plan's standardized directive? Inform them, I'll give it to you. Inform them, build up your trustworthiness with them, and get their choice on the record. It's a protection for you, and it's education for them. I believe it's actually your duty to your patient if the directive will compromise their care or make their treatment longer. Alinsky also says, all issues must be polarized if action is to follow. Thus, if we want to get rid of corporate and government control, we cannot say there is anything good about evidence-based medicine. There isn't, but if we hedge it all for diplomatic purposes, this will dilute the argument against it and the will of the people to get rid of it. It must be targeted as the evil it is, and we must stand 100% against it. Finally, make fun of your opponents where you can. Alinsky says, the most potent weapons known to mankind are humor and satire. It should be remembered that you can threaten the enemy and get away with it. You can insult and annoy him, but the one thing that is unforgivable and is certain to get him to react is to laugh at him. And as you may have noticed, President Obama uses this tactic all the time. We should all learn how to counter and communicate the ridiculous assertions of EBM and then, whenever possible, make fun of them. The more we laugh about the absurdity of treating patients like amorphous, faceless populations, the more we can make people who talk and write about EBM in hushed and serious tones look foolish. What happens if you start saying things like, really? That's just so funny that you would think that's really how science works. Or if you said, I think it's funny that the CEO of the health plan thinks he can tell me how to practice medicine when I don't try to tell him how to play golf. I know it may be counterintuitive, but I think Alinsky's tactics may be useful to those of us who want to take action to save health freedom. Let's laugh and ridicule EBM out of existence and out of the lives of patients and doctors. Finally, our organization, Citizens Council for Health Freedom, we plan to create a major dog and pony show to show the truth about HIPAA and high-tech and electronic health records. This will attack the primary tool of control, the outside access to private patient data. which is used to track patients, to create EBM, and to penalize doctors. Join with us in this endeavor. Together we can stop the takeover of medicine. Thank you.